You're watching News at Prime. We continue our coverage of the escalating situation in the Middle East, the tensions there, and its possible implications for the rest of the world, including us in South Africa. Now, Iran, which fired missiles on Israel last night, is a member of the BRICS Plus formation. So let's discuss this now. The bloc's Business Council leader is Stavros Nicolaou, who joins us tonight. Dr. Nicolaou, good evening to you, and thank you for your time. You are the South Africa BRICS Business Council leader. How concerned are you by the developments in the Middle East?
Firstly, good evening to all the viewers, and thanks very much for having me on the program. As you indeed mentioned, I am one of the 5 elected and appointed South African Chapter Business Council members. We are elected by business, by various business constituencies, and then appointed by government. So in essence, the constituency we need to speak to is the business community in South Africa. And of course, as with any conflict and or war anywhere in the world, it's never good for business ultimately. So some of the escalation we're seeing in the Middle East and other parts of the world, not only confined to the Middle East, do bear some concern for us as a South African business community. We realize that if this expands into a regional conflict, there could be an economic downturn, there could be pressure on oil and gas prices, supply and demand could go out of kilter, there could be disruption in logistics and supply chain. Yeah. So it's not a good picture, generally speaking. So we favor, as South African business, as a BRICS Business Council here in South Africa, we favor a diplomatic solution with the cessation of hostilities, not only in the Middle East, but elsewhere in the world, so that we can continue with normal supply chains and logistics around the world and minimize disruption. So that's what we would favor, of course.
Dr. Nicolaou, thank you for your patience. I interrupted you about the plans around what you think the impact of this is going to be, particularly for the BRICS formation. Let me ask you this straightforward question. You have Iran, that is part of the BRICS formation. You have Russia, that is part of the BRICS formation. These 2 countries are effectively involved in a war. How does that complicate the business practice within this formation? Is that a challenge?
So let me pick up from our earlier conversation and just say that the best way to achieve global peace and security and both political and social stability in any country is through economic growth. And I think that is the path that we as South African business prefer. That's our preferred choice. And I think answering your question directly, and I indicated earlier that the South African chapter of the BRICS Business Council is elected by organized business. So, for example, myself and my other 4 colleagues were nominated by organized business. And we have a very clear posture. Our posture is to always act in the best interest of the South African economy. What is going to grow our economy, create jobs? And to that end, our posture is clear. We don't favor the East, the West, or the South. We recognize that there are business opportunities in the East. Case in point as well in the West. I mean, the West remains our biggest trading partner here in South Africa, and there are new emerging opportunities in the South. So we need to engage all of these markets, but we need to do so with an understanding of where our country and our economy is going to best benefit, where business people are going to best benefit. Now, it's quite interesting to note when one looks at, excuse me, the various trade patterns. So if I look at our trade as South Africa with initially BRIC, the 4 BRIC countries, but now expanded by a further 3, Our trade, in fact, with the new 3 members is minuscule. It's really small with Iran, for example. It's slightly bigger with Egypt, and of course, Ethiopia represents a growth frontier. So our main trade within BRICS Plus is actually with China and India. And I think those are 2 countries of particular focus for us. We also need to, just keeping on the thematic of trade patterns, because one needs to be scientific about how you analyze these opportunities. It's important to note that we run a trade deficit with China, Brazil, India, and Russia. And there's no problem running a trade deficit. What is important is how you bridge that trade deficit through collaboration and partnerships. And certainly China and India are the 2 most important there, and that's the posture of our council.
Well, you use that word, trade deficit, and you now take me back to the summit, the BRICS summit, which effectively expanded the BRIC formation into the BRICS Plus formation. This was in August of last year. And part of the big effort was to try and invite the rest of Africa in order to take advantage of the possible business opportunities that would arise out of that. I guess my final question to you is the following, that with these partners I've mentioned who are involved in a war situation, Russia and Iran, does that weaken the influence of the BRICS Plus formation, not only in terms of investment opportunities for countries like South Africa, but indeed the continent wide? Does that become a difficulty in attracting new countries into this formation in order for these opportunities, investment opportunities, to flourish?
I think there are 2 aspects to the question you raised. I think the first aspect is, and just keeping with my earlier thematic, that we are business people. Our mandate is to seek out and enable, provide an enabling environment as best as we can for economic growth within these partnerships. And I would certainly say that we know where the more important markets lie, and I think that's where the focus will continue to be. We need to continue focusing on bridging some of these trade deficits. I think that's a very important consideration. There is some small headway being made in that respect, and we need to keep on that trajectory and that line of thinking. Now, the second aspect is very often investment follows sentiment. And there's no doubt that where you have areas of active conflict, particularly within a formation, people might interpret your sentiment in a particular way, and that might put off investors sometime. So I think the posture we've got to keep is a very clear posture, and this is certainly one that we're keeping within the BRICS Council, is to say that we've got to understand where the best economic interests of business and of our country lies. And I think where there are risky environments, I think we need to identify those risky environments, but we need to keep a posture that says we need to look at where the best economic interests of our country lie. And, because I was listening to the American spokesperson earlier, you had him on earlier, it's always worth bearing in mind Henry Kissinger's words, where he said, America doesn't have friends, it only has interests. And perhaps we need to learn a little about that in South Africa. I'm not suggesting we forsake friends. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I am saying is we need to fish where our best interests lie. And I think if we keep that pathway, we're not going to run into problems down the line.
Very interesting comments indeed. Thank you very much for your time, Dr. Stavros Nicolaou.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for your time. He is with the BRICS Plus Business Council representing the South African chapter.